All right, let's finally talk about Begonia. So I did see Begonia a couple days after it came out, but I felt like it was kind of too late to talk about in a timely fashion. So I've thought I'd kind of take my time, sit on the film a bit. I've seen it twice now, and the reason for that is the first time I saw it, I'd actually just come back from Greece. They weren't playing it in Greece for some reason, despite Yorgos being a Greek film director, but I've come back from Greece, and the first time I saw it, I was actually quite jet lagged. So even though I really enjoyed it and really liked it, and I think I caught everything, I was also just dead tired, and I felt like I'll have a better experience if I see it again. I do think this is a movie you have to see twice. If you know where it goes, knowing all those pieces, I think it makes every single interaction a lot more interesting. You can slice it a lot of many different ways. Now, I had a few reservations going into Begonia. The central premise here, right, is this idea that Teddy, played by Jesse Plemons, kidnaps a billionaire CEO played by Emma Stone named Michelle, and he is hell-bent on figuring out whether she is an alien or not. That's the core little mystery. That's the core story here. The reason I was concerned is a few reasons. One, it's a remake. I love Yorgos Lanthimos for his original voice, for his original films. And the fact there was a remake did kind of knock some wind out of my sails. I've since seen the original South Korean film, and we will actually talk about that today and some key differences that I find interesting, as well as the themes that are explored in both. But two, I was also kind of concerned because, I feel like I'm one of the only people that really seems to care or notice it. I haven't heard too many people talk about it, but literally in Kinds of Kindness, his previous film, Yorgos Lanthimos' previous film, Jesse Plemons, in one of the short stories, plays a character who is hell-bent on figuring out whether his wife is a doppelganger or not. So I was kind of seeing that being like, okay, doppelganger alien, that's kind of the same plot. And on top of that, the third film in Kinds of Kindness also has this element of like, is there truly a god or a messiah, or is there not? So as a result, I was sort of like, this is charted territory for Yorgos Lanthimos, incredibly recently as well. But as I watched the movie, all those things kind of faded away. One, there is a section of the big trailer with the Chapel Roan song that I have absolutely been addicted to. I'll play it here, but I think it's absolutely wonderful.
They want you to think it's you who made this world, but it's always been them.
You know this is crazy, right?
I know what you are.
On top of that, like, Emma Stone's performance is fantastic. Jesse Plemons is incredible. I think it might be my favorite actor performance of the year. He is absolutely phenomenal here. He is simultaneously horrifying and ignorant and occasionally smart and off-putting, but also you have a lot of empathy for him at times. It reminds me of what Joaquin Phoenix was doing with Joe Cross in Eddington. You know, someone who you don't agree with their methods and you don't agree with what they're doing, but you're also like, I kind of feel bad for you in this weird way. You are tortured and you're not the sharpest tool in the shed, and this is tough to watch. I think this movie has less to say about maybe kind of wealth disparity and, you know, the rich versus the poor than maybe people would have hoped for or expected. I've noticed that's a lot of critique of this film. A lot of people have been saying, like, why was this set in America? You know, what was the point of this movie? What was the point of all this? And I want to touch on that briefly because I find it kind of disappointing. You have a really tight mystery thriller bottle film here. Every single audience I've seen this with is absolutely eating it up the whole time. They're laughing where they should be laughing. They're surprised where they should be surprised. And I guess I'm finding the complaint that this movie doesn't have a reason to exist because it's not sane enough is a little disappointing, and dare I say also slightly not true. I think by the end of this film there is a clear message. It might just not be the message you thought you were signing up for given the initial premise. I think this movie, as it goes on, becomes less interested in a simple, like, rich is bad, poor is good. And I think that's kind of very clear from the moment the movie starts. Very early on, Jesse Plemons gets his cousin, a mentally challenged man, to do something, and I was pretty horrified. And I don't know if people just kind of haven't really reckoned with how horrible that situation is, and we'll get into it in spoilers, but straight away I was like, okay, we're dealing with stickier, dirtier territory here. I don't think this is a simple Luigi Mangione sort of story where you're meant to kind of low-key be rooting for someone and not rooting for the other person, or being like, this is true justice. This is a lot more complicated than that. And I do think it kind of takes that central hook of, like, you know, what if an Amazon worker kidnapped their boss who they have all these grievances with, but as the movie goes on, you slowly realize it is about something deeper, darker, and kind of greater, dare I say. Now, there is a lot of complicated social commentary that we can get into in the spoiler section. But for now, I did just want to say that it's almost the way people write off The Menu completely, that movie with Anya Taylor-Joy and Ralph Fiennes. Like, I agree, it is kind of simple baby's first social commentary in terms of its class critique. But at the same time, I think it's a shame when people completely write off that movie when there is also a pretty fun, compelling thriller movie about a guy just losing his shit and hating the art he creates and turning on his audience and murdering them. You get what I mean? Like, I kind of find that movie fun. And yes, a lot of the social commentary is very simple. It's very like, oh my God, like the rich suck and they're simple and vapid. But it's like, at the same time, there's a fun thriller here. You kind of get what I'm saying? Like, yes, obviously the central premise here, this idea that a man is convinced that his billionaire CEO boss is an alien, does speak to this idea that billionaires in society are so out of touch, they may as well be aliens. Like, it's a very simple initial commentary. But what I appreciate about this movie is as it unfolds, as you learn more about these characters, it actually gets a lot more complicated and complex. I think it has a lot more to say about conspiracy theorists, validity in some of these conspiracy theories, how people get into these rabbit holes, what gets them into these rabbit holes, and the dangers of falling into these rabbit holes. I think it comments a lot more on that a bit better. I think it's a lot better film about conspiracy than it is about wealth disparity and kind of class warfare, in my opinion. And we'll get to that when we get to that. But I also think the movie is about the planet. It is about environmentalism. It is about our curse on the planet, the way we tear each other apart and what it's doing to the planet. I mean, if you look at the Korean original called Save the Green Planet, it's in the title. And this whole motif in the movie about worker bees, yes, you can kind of equate that to the way Michelle, the billionaire CEO, looks down on her workers. But at the same time, I think it's a little more nuanced and a little more sticky and complicated than that. But I can't really talk around spoilers anymore. So in order to do this, we're going to have to get into full spoilers. So if you want to see this movie, it's a 9 out of 10 for me. It could even go higher next time I watch it. But 9 out of 10. I think this is one of the best films of the year. It's easily in my top 3 to top 5. Incredible performances, fantastic music, brilliant shot composition, editing. Like, it's technically pretty flawless. I absolutely love it. Now, let's get into spoilers. 3, 2, 1. Before we do, please consider getting a membership to this channel for the cost of a cup of coffee a month. You get a weekly or fortnightly podcast where I talk about every single new movie, every single old movie I've watched at home or in theaters. So you get a lot of me yapping about different movies and shows. Thank you so much for considering. Links are in the description below. Now back to the review. Let's get into it. All right, so I've just got a bunch of loose notes here. We're just going to go through it. So first off, straight away, Clemens' whole grievance, part of the reason he's so angry and gone down this rabbit hole, is he's furious at what happened to his mum. His mum was a drug addict who was then offered this experimental treatment that would help her get off the drugs, and it put her in a coma. Now, there is more twists to that story, which we'll get into as we get into the whole reveal, but let's just start there, all right? Clemens, he does say he's mad about the fact that he thinks the aliens are going to wipe out humanity or end humanity. He's hoping to bargain with the emperor of the aliens. That's why he's taken Michelle hostage. He's hoping to score a meeting with the emperor. Little does he realize he's actually had that the whole time. He is with the empress and he just doesn't realize. And even there's some commentary about how he can't even begin to assume that that is actually the empress herself. Maybe it's because she's a woman. I don't know, but that's there. But more importantly, Clemens is furious at what this chemical company has done to his mother, even though at the start of the film, the buy-in for him and Donnie is chemical castration. He chemically castrates his mentally challenged cousin. And the cousin even says, I thought I might have kids one day. I thought I might have a family one day. I think he even just says, I thought, I want to be intimate one day. And Jesse Plemons is like, this is more important. So yes, I think the interesting thing about Jesse Plemons' character is he's incredibly manipulative, but I don't think he's knowingly, intentionally manipulative. I think he believes in everything he's doing. I don't even think he realizes how manipulative he's been. I genuinely think for Jesse Plemons, this is life or death. This is a greater cause. And given the fact that the aliens are real, I guess in theory he's somewhat right. But the tragedy of this movie is the idea that Jesse Plemons is right about Emma Stone's character being an alien, all right? He's right about the fact that they are capable of wiping out humanity. I think the tragedy here, and the way I read it, the way I think the most powerful interpretation of this movie is Jesse Plemons' treatment of Michelle in this is ultimately the deciding factor of what is done. You know, he is ultimately the deciding factor in all of humanity being wiped out. And dare I say, I think a really compelling read after everything we learn about Teddy is, would he have been happy with the ultimate outcome? Yes, initially he really does want to save the planet, but I almost think there's a version of him that, given everything he's been through, given the fact that he was abused as a child by that cop, given the fact that his cousin is now gone, given his mum's gone, given his dad's gone, given this awful existence he's lived, if he got to meet the aliens, would part of him being relieved that all of humanity is gone and nature returns, the bees return? I think that's really interesting. I think what makes this movie more complicated is Donnie's inclusion, all right? Like, for example, Teddy is a character who initially will read as the working class hero going against the billionaire for some people, but very quickly it's not the case. Again, he chemically castrates Donnie. That's number one fucked up thing, even though he's really angry about what happened to his mum. Two, he actually is willing to murder, kill, torture, all of this stuff to multiple aliens. Let's even assume he thinks they're aliens. Like, that's animal interspecies cruelty, whatever you want to call it. But then when he finds out that Emma Stone, Michelle's character, is like of royal descent, she's high up, all of a sudden he's like, oh, well, you can sit at the table. Join us for dinner. Let me get you some clothes. Like, he's feeding in theory, also to, you know, this sort of like the rich get richer and the poor need to suffer sort of mentality. Like, he's willing to treat working class aliens as terrible, but then he's willing to treat someone who he finds out is high up as, like, you know, wonderful and treat them better. And I found that some pretty interesting self-destructive commentary on this sort of character, you know? I think Donnie is a really sad character who slipped through the cracks, but like, Jesse Plemons is not this perfect hero that I think people wanted him to be. He is someone that is using someone below him and not taking care of someone below him. And yes, this is part of a system that he's learned in order to survive, but it's tragic nonetheless. And I also do think, you know, I think it's really interesting that Teddy cannot see the humanity in Michelle at all. And by the end of the movie, after spending so much time around that, she can't see humanity in anyone anymore. You know what I mean? He can't see it in her. And by the end of it, she can't see it in the planet. She's like, that's it. They need to go. That's kind of what I was getting at before, when people kind of go like, oh, this movie's really simple, I was expecting it to say more. I completely hear you on that to an extent, but I think the ending shifts it into something more, first off, science fiction territory, like genuine science fiction territory, but also it shifts it into more philosophical, nihilistic sort of territory, right? Now you are reckoning with, instead of like rich versus poor, you are reckoning with humanity in general. Do we deserve to exist given what we do? You know, there's this whole convoluted backstory, which in my opinion, I take as gospel. I think at the time when Michelle gives this insane backstory about the dinosaurs, she gives this insane backstory about Noah's Ark, and this whole, if you really focus, there's this whole idea that there's an original version of humans, and then we kind of like wiped ourselves out, and then this new angry version of humans showed up. Like, that's what we are. We've got this angry, hateful gene or something. So it's very convoluted, but the ultimate story here is this idea that these aliens showed up, they accidentally wiped out the dinosaurs, they felt bad, and they were like, as a gift, we'll give you humans, right? And humans are just committing genocides, we're being awful to one another, and ultimately we are destroying the planet. And essentially, they just go, we're failed experiments, we're pulling the plug. And I do wonder whether Jesse Plemons, in some way, shape, or form, if he went on this like journey with Michelle, if they worked together and found out what their ultimate goal was or what their ultimate decision was, whether he would have been happy. That's what I was thinking. And I just think it's such a shame to not reckon with these characters on that level, you know, because I find that really, really fascinating. They both cared about bees. And it's interesting because when they're sitting there having that chat about the bees at the dinner table, you can just chalk it up to Michelle trying to survive. But there's this whole section where she talks about the idea that she really admires bees. She admires their resolve in the face of adversity. Teddy obviously reads this as, you like the fact that they're subservient. You like the fact that they always work for the queen bee, you know? And in theory, you can't really blame him for having that read, but I think on rewatch, it's really fascinating. One, maybe she's talking about the fact that she is in peril, you know, and she is still trying to keep her shit together and figure this out, and she knows bees would do the same. But more importantly, I think it's kind of hard because I do completely agree that her being an alien undercuts the social commentary, right? She is actually an alien. One, it validates his conspiracy, but the idea that not only is she an alien, but she's an alien that ultimately wants to help humanity, it does undercut the idea of like, billionaires are evil, out of touch aliens. On top of that, the kind of tangent of the idea that like the experiments she was doing on Teddy's mother were ultimately to try and redeem humanity and stop them from being wiped out, stop them being this necessary thing that the aliens need to remove. It is tragedy. It feels like a Greek or Shakespearean tragedy in its ending, but it does undo the initial maybe easy message of like billionaires whack. Billionaires may as well be aliens, because this one's a good one. But I think at the same time, it doesn't necessarily, because one, she's very fickle with the removal of the human race. You can read it that way. But I just took it as like she saw just an utter chaos in humanity with Jesse Plemons' character. And as she says, she also turned cruel herself. I think a lot of what Michelle says, even though it might feel like a lie on your first watch, on rewatch, given who she is, I actually like to take a lot of it as gospel. And I think her whole monologue about how being on this planet has made me dark and mean and angry, and like I've become one of them. I've turned into one of them, I think is interesting. She's obviously, in order to thrive, in order to become capable of working on these experiments in the world, she's had to become cruel. She's had to ask people and kind of manipulate them into, yeah, you can go home, but you can also stay later, please, but also go home, but don't, like she has watched herself also morally degrade. And I think that's really fascinating. Now, you could read this as she's just sort of like making excuses for herself, and she got into this and she started enjoying it. But I think when she goes back up to her alien ship, she's removed out of it. She's kind of realizing how shallow all that stuff was. And I think it's really fascinating. On top of that, I think there is some interesting social commentary. I've seen people like being like, okay, so like there's that whole discussion about diversity, but like what was that about? Especially when the movie's not particularly diverse. But I think it does comment on this idea that like Michelle is sitting there and, on the initial read, it's this idea that like she is engaging in bullshit diversification corporate speak. She doesn't like the fact that they're saying the word diverse over and over and over again. And low key, she was kind of right about diversifying the language, but like you are meant to be reading that as purely just performative activism, which is something Jesse Plemons brings up later. But I think what's interesting is when we are teleported up to the mothership, it is a notably very incredibly diverse cast of aliens. And I think that also serves as some commentary. The idea that like, down on planet Earth, like we're all so hung up on, we're all so divided, and, minorities have been treated awfully that we have to have all these like, diversity programs, and corporations are just like half-assing it, and it's not really the proper solution to the problem. It's just human nature itself always pits one another against each other. And it's interesting that on her home planet, it's like she's the emperor, and all her fellow high superiors, it's a diverse kind of board. And I think that's interesting, right? Because as an alien in that moment, she would be sitting there being like, God, this is bullshit. This is all just performative bullshit. This is more of humanity's performative bullshit, and we need to be kinder to each other. We need this stuff to be solved on a macro level. This stupid video I'm doing isn't quite the solution. Do you know what I mean? Does that kind of make any sense? My point here being, it's interesting that her blending in as a human, she is engaging in performative inclusion when in space there is actual inclusion, right? And I think that's interesting. I'm not saying there's an issue with diversity or inclusion. I'm saying it's interesting that on Earth, her approach to it is kind of bullshit, and in space, it's just a given. That's kind of what I was trying to say. It's like, I feel like knowing she's an alien makes these conversations a lot more interesting, because you are sitting there being like, is she levitating as this superior god among us? And I will also say, as a Prometheus fan, I was low-key very excited watching this movie, because if any of you know the original ending of what Prometheus was meant to be, it was meant to be this idea that this ancient alien race made humanity. And the original ending was meant to be this idea that they actually sent an engineer down to talk to us, and the engineer, we crucified them. The engineer ended up being what we see as Jesus, right? So I was kind of getting a kick when she was giving the whole backstory and the reveal that these aliens are what made humanity. I was like, oh, cool. Like I'm getting my actual Prometheus. Like I thought it was cool. So that's the thing. Like as a science fiction movie, it's actually pretty compelling. And we are going to keep getting into the nitty gritty. I just just want to say, I thought the whole movie she was going to be an alien. I think given Kinds of Kindness and a lot of the movies in that one, I was like, like surely that's just the direction this goes. Surely. On top of that, I just figured like there's no other way for this story to go really. Like I just feel like it needs to go that way. Otherwise, it needs to be really harrowing in its ending. So at first, I was like, oh, okay, like Teddy's gone and it was a bit awful and she's in the ambulance and people were cheering for her. And then she gets out of the ambulance. I'm like, okay, we're cooking. And she teleports up. And when the initial reveal of like, yep, humanity's done, that kind of sucked, I genuinely thought it was going to end there. But the montage of all the dead people I thought was so wonderful and effective. And this is a moment that improves on the original film, in my opinion. I thought the choice to make the ending this idea that like all of humanity is gone, but all the animals survive, particularly the bees begin to come back, was kind of perfect. First off, the title Begonia refers to this Greek ritual. I think it's this myth. I don't think it actually works or is performed, but I think it's this idea of summoning bees from an animal's dead carcass. And I guess you can look at the earth as being close on the brink of extinction and now humanity's gone and the bees come back, right? Like I thought that was pretty cool. I thought it was pretty neat. On top of that, I just thought the way it was executed was really haunting and effective. Particularly the shot of the young people having sex, I thought was really quite confronting. But so many of them, I appreciated the shots of children being dead. I thought the shots of the toy dinosaurs walking around was pretty awesome. I really like striking visuals, and it reminded me of this very famous Yorgos Lanthimos shoot he did a while ago. But yeah, I do wonder, you know what I mean? And we need to talk about Save the Green Planet for a bit, but that ending, I do wonder if Jesse Plemons, like I can't help but wonder. And this is when you know like characters are good, because you actually think about their feelings and what they do and what they mean and what they care about. But I do wonder if he did make it to the mothership and he got to hang out with Michelle, and if he saw, the bees coming back and humanity being wiped out, whether part of him would have been happy. Now, I will say part of Jesse Plemons' motivation is not selfish, but it is definitely, he believes that it's because he wants to save humanity. That's his mission now. But at the same time, it is someone who wants purpose, it is someone who's been broken by the system. I think the tragedy here is, the reveal that Michelle is like, I guess one of the good ones, but not really. Like, she's still playing the same billionaire games and she does wipe out humanity. It just depends, as the director and writer have said, whether you read this as a beautiful ending, like a bit of a nice ending, the idea that nature's come back and we're gone, and all our hate and suffering is gone, or whether you view it as an awful ending because we're all dead. It does depend. But at the same time, there's a sense of tragedy, this idea that she was actually trying to find a cure to his mum. She was there to potentially save and redeem the human race. I think it's quite a scary idea, and this idea that they're in this like bottle, they're in this bottle movie and he's driving her towards this conclusion instead of working with her. Like, I do ever wonder if there was any ever version where they work together. But at the same time, let's not paint Michelle as this perfect, omnipotent, godly angel. There's a point where she's strangling him and she gets down in the mud. She calls him a loser. She seems to be enjoying it a fair bit. But at the same time, I mean, can you blame her? Like, he was arrogant and he was smug. And I think there are these really great moments where Jesse Plemons does walk the line of being empathetic. His flashbacks, these incredible dreamlike flashback sequences, are really moving and sad. But at the same time, like, he'll be really, really awful to Michelle. A lot of it, like, he hates her being smarter. She is clearly well educated, by the way. Like, she's switched on, she's smart. And I think there are moments where she does genuinely seem to care. Yes, you can make the argument that she's just trying to save her own skin, but yeah, there are moments where I thought she did genuinely seem to care about his mum to an extent, and there were some moments where I think she definitely cared, I thought, about Don. I don't think she was ever going to kill Donnie if she didn't have to. And I think Don's ending was really, really sad. I found on rewatch, knowing where that went, I think when I first watched it, it was just shocking. But on rewatch, knowing where that went, I was really struggling. Like I had a pit in my stomach. I don't get that often, by the way. I've seen really horrific movies, but yeah, this is the first time like in ages, maybe ever, on rewatch, I'm sitting there having this moment of like, oh, I don't know if I can watch this again. Like this was really awful. And yeah, knowing the whole movie that Jesse Plemons is right but kind of wrong adds this sense of tragedy. Knowing that Michelle is being earnest with a lot of the things she's saying, it's just a really tragic, sad movie. But this is why I want to bring up Save the Green Planet again. Now, I do think at the end of the day, if you've seen Begonia, this movie is spoiled. It does follow the same plot with some changes. Now, I will say for the most part, I think Begonia ultimately is a far better executed movie. I've seen people who didn't like Begonia or like, what's the point, just randomly say without having seen Save the Green Planet, being like, well, I guess that's probably better because like it has more to say about Korea, whereas this movie didn't have anything to say about America. And I think that's such a shame because I think the movie ultimately becomes something more about humanity overall. And I think the setting helps this initial conflict, but as the movie goes on and it gets to its true thesis, I think it does become a more human story. I managed to connect with this fully. I'm from Australia. I wasn't sitting there being like, damn, America be crazy. I think Eddington is a lot more specific about America. And the reason I say that is Save the Green Planet is covering a lot of the same themes. And this was almost 20 years ago, I think. I think it was 2001. But strikingly similar. So I almost think the Save the Green Planet invalidates, dare I say, a lot of the criticisms that I've seen about this movie. Maybe not. Like, I mean, maybe the story is going to be shallow always to some people, but I actually think it lands as a lot more shallow in this one. Because I don't think the movie pulls off its ending as well. But also, I think the title, Save the Green Planet, and the title, Begonia, say what this film is about. It's more about us as a global species. It's about the planet. It's about the decay that we are causing, both morally and emotionally and physically and environmentally. And, you know, maybe for some that seems like edgelord nihilism. But I actually found it really confronting and sad. And I mean, I'm not going to pretend I don't engage in any of this. You get what I mean? Like, I've got all these Apple products, you know, I got the vaccine. I've got a French bulldog, which is like a genetically engineered crime against nature. I don't feel great about it, but at the same time, like, watching this movie is making me think about all that stuff. Like, I'm sitting there being like, oh, like, all this is very confronting, you know? And I can't deny what we're doing to the planet. And there was this beautiful idea about it just being nature. You know, all these silly social issues, all these hateful emotional issues that we all get caught up on, and all this angst and distrust. But at the same time, like, we are humanity. We are an evolved species. We have taught each other emotions and morals and right from wrong. And like, it is important to care about all this stuff. So simultaneously, the movie lands as this like, yeah, fuck humanity. But also, like, you're watching all these beautiful things we were doing, like these kids' toys we made, these creative environments that are now full of dead people. And you're like, what a waste of everything we achieved. I actually thought it was really good. And I've seen people complain about, you know, what was the point of Stavros's, the police officers, the police officer abusing Teddy. Like, that just felt like Yorgos edgelord. Now, I will say, it is incredibly funny to note that one of the only changes Yorgos made in this movie was adding that. But I'm going to say it. It's one of my favorite parts of the movie for a couple reasons. One, it shows that it's first off very clearly not just a rich is bad, poor is good movie. All right, this is a guy, and I will actually note, I've seen people be like, this is absurd. He's clearly around the same age as Jesse Plemons. If not, he might actually be younger. I actually think that's really fascinating. Jesse Plemons is shown to be disenfranchised, a little slow. You know, his dad left. His mum is a conspiracy nut. This is in the original movie. This is apparently in a deleted scene in Begonia, and it's in the text as well. We see that she was already convincing, you know, Teddy that they're putting microorganisms or something in her blood, yada, yada, yada. And I mean, I guess in theory she was right. That's the hard thing about the ending. But regardless, like, he is a disenfranchised guy. So I almost wonder, like, you know, maybe this babysitter was younger, or this babysitter was around the same age, and the age gap didn't particularly make sense because mentally Jesse Plemons wasn't all there. So that didn't really bug me or rub me the wrong way. But I think more importantly, what's fascinating about the cop character is what it says about Jesse Plemons' relationship with humanity. One, it's probably a big driving force in what broke him as a person. Two, it's probably as a result, I also think it's interesting that like maybe chemical castration for him isn't as big of a, threat emotionally or physically. Like maybe he doesn't have those desires properly aligned in general because he's already been sexually hurt. Maybe he already has complexes built up. His mum's gone. Like, who knows? Do you get what I mean? So I found that interesting. But more importantly, it is kind of seen as the worst thing. Like, sexual violence is oftentimes like we have a really perfectly fine relationship with violence in movies for the most part, but sexual violence as a society, we absolutely despise. And I think the choice to have that be done to Teddy does seriously suggest that I think his worldview on humanity, as I keep suggesting this idea that I wonder if he ultimately would have been okay with the ending. I almost think like he'd probably look at how he was treated by the police officer, by his parents, by everyone, and go, fuck him. And I think that's what it's there for. Like, it shows that, like, it's not just simply interested in being like, oh, aren't billionaires bad? Like, it's different types of bad. You get what I mean? Like, people that are hanging out in these sort of environments might gravitate towards this sort of infliction of pain, whereas people that operate in these sort of spaces will function on this globalistic, scary, chemical compound sort of pain, And look, even though some of the social commentary might be undone by the fact that she is actually an alien, I think at the same time, like everything she's doing, the fact that Jesse Plemons believes it's sinister, the fact that Jesse Plemons think they are intentionally hurting his mum, still lands as effective social commentary, because you can't really blame him for thinking that. You can't really blame him for having distrust in governments. Now, there is one change, all right? I think all the changes for Begonia work better for the tone of Begonia, for the ending for Begonia. And I don't think Save the Green Planet doesn't work as well. Like, it just doesn't come together as well. All the pieces don't work together as well. But with Save the Green Planet, there is only one thing that I wish was in Begonia, or I think it did better. And that is, there is this section where the billionaire, when Michelle escapes in Begonia and she discovers the room, and she finds all the other people Jesse Plemons have hurt. Actually, there's two changes. All the other people Jesse Plemons have hurt. Also, I don't think we ever get clarification that all the other people Jesse Plemons have hurt are billionaires or rich people. I know at the start he says that like mostly they're billionaires, I think, or something, but he might have just been torturing like, I don't know, an Amazon worker, like who knows. But regardless, in Save the Green Planet, there's two changes. The first one is, one, there is a section when the billionaire is escaping, he goes through Teddy's life story, all right, or the Teddy equivalent. And some of it's drawn in his own blood, some of it's drawn in crayons from when he was a child, but it's this storybook he's made of his own life. And it shows flashbacks of him getting beat by his teachers because he couldn't pay tuition. It shows how awful his life has been. His mum being sick, his dad dying in the mines. There is a lot more clearly about the different experiences of classes, but in a beautiful, surprising moment, the billionaire actually starts crying. And one, it makes obviously the dynamic a lot more complicated, but he starts crying reading this guy's life story. This is a guy that in this movie has put him on a crucifix. And I found it seriously emotionally striking. Now, the issue is I don't think the movie comes together, and at the end, it doesn't land that feeling of Begonia, the feeling that Begonia had where there is a judgment being made. There is, you treated me awfully. That's it, In Save the Green Planet, it just does kind of land as like a, turns out he was right. Like the planet explodes, whereas Begonia does nail that sort of feeling of like, oh my God, what has Teddy done? What have these two in this awful situation done together, But another thing I really liked is, the billionaire's crying. I do like the read in Save the Green Planet that maybe he's sitting there going like, oh, after experiencing that guy's life, no one deserved to go through that level of suffering. But at the same time, as I said, the ending isn't executed as well. The second difference, and I actually kind of get why this wasn't in Begonia, because it does make it a little more convoluted, but I think it's really compelling. The second difference, and I think this difference would have made me believe that Michelle wasn't an alien a lot more, is the idea that every other person that the Teddy equivalent in Save the Green Planet kidnaps is the bully from his past, the awful teacher from his past, the person that slapped his mum from his past. Like, it's all these notable figures that were in that storybook. These are people he's kidnapped. So it does make it feel like a lot more of a personal vendetta, and then he's convinced himself that they're aliens. But I think that gets more convoluted when the twist is actually that they were aliens, or at least one of them was aliens, you know? And it just gets a little messy. But I think if executed well, that's a really compelling idea as well. And it makes Teddy a lot more untrustworthy. But yeah, regardless, that's the only thing I would have kept, is if Michelle had cried looking at Teddy's backstory. But at the same time, I do think they lean into the idea that Michelle has some genuine empathy for him. I think there is some earnest sense when she was looking around the house and she's like, I've seen our money isn't enough. I've seen we haven't done enough. Yes, again, if you hate billionaires, you can just read it that she's trying to save her own skin. But I think, given this is going to sound really weird, I actually have more empathy for Michelle finding out she's an alien. There almost seems, it seems like he's been mean to this animal that's on this lost planet that has like sent there for a mission to help them, and like it just makes it a little more complicated. And this is where the movie gets really fascinating, right? Because going into it, I was also expecting a little more of a simple class critique of like, oh, billionaires are so evil and so out of touch. But I think this movie makes a few key choices. One, the fact that she's a woman. I think they initially do actually try and nip that in the bud to an extent by having this chemical castration plotline. I think that's actually there so we can have fun with this movie. Otherwise, truthfully, we would probably be sitting there with this fear of sexual violence. And this is actually explored in Save the Green Planet. There's a point where the lead character in Save the Green Planet gets this, like, I think it's a dildo, but it's this metal rod that shoots out steam, and he's threatening to shove it up the guy's butt. And I was like, wow, this takes it into really unforgivably dark territory, which I did appreciate, but I was also like, yeah, I can't picture that in Begonia. And the reason I say that is because I think the movie was trying to tiptoe a little more. I think initially, yes, you go into the movie expecting, I think some people really wanted like this Luigi Mangione vibe of like, fuck them billionaires. And it very quickly pivots into something else. I think that's helped by the fact that she is a woman. I just think, truthfully, violence against women will register differently for most audiences. I think Yorgos is smart. I think he knows that. So I think that's why the chemical castration thing was there. But I also think as a result, they make Michelle smart, genuinely really smart. I think in Save the Green Planet, weirdly enough, even though the title seems more environmentally interested, they make the billionaire a lot more cartoonishly evil. He refuses to pay an Uber driver or a taxi driver the agreed upon fare and then tells him off for caring about money. It feels a lot more cartoonishly simplified. And I think what I found compelling about Michelle as a character is she is genuinely good at trying to understand Jesse Plemons or Teddy. Like, yes, again, it could all be an act, but I find their conversations a lot more compelling, a lot more interesting. It does seem like she's trying to understand him. And as she spends more time with him, she drops all this, like, let's start a dialogue. Let's really unpack this because, and credit to Teddy's character, he does not seem interesting. He does have the strength of his convictions. And I appreciate, like, you know, Don will even confront him about this and be like, are you sure this isn't about your mum? I'm sorry for all the hurt that's been done to you. All of that stuff makes this a lot more of a human story. And I always, what I love about this movie is, yeah, this idea, like thinking about what if these two could have got on the same wavelength for a bit? You know, is there a version where Michelle actually would have been like, okay, like, I'm an alien. Like, I swear I'm an alien. Do you guys believe that she was being earnest about not thinking he would actually be able to pull off the antifreeze thing? I do. And again, that's just given the ending and what they were there to do. And she does look sad about having to wipe out humanity. You know, she does look at the Earth with a look of sadness, which I really like. But again, like, even that ending makes us feel so small and scary. It makes us feel so small, and like, it almost feels Lovecraftian in the scale of it. But yeah, I do think it's about nature. I do think it's about our effect on one another. And yeah, I do kind of like the idea that this like pure intentioned alien has had to climb the corporate ladder and lose any sort of humanity or goodness in her. And, you know, Jesse Plemons isn't a particularly good person himself. I think the only difference is Michelle is smart enough, self-aware enough that we can actually hold her fully accountable to some of the stuff she does. Whereas with Jesse Plemons, I think this is someone who is suffering, who's in deep pain, who's genuinely a cracked person. And yes, he is incredibly manipulative of Don, but I don't even think he's cognizant of it. Like, for example, with Teddy's character, he chooses Don. There's almost this sick, mean sense of humor in the idea that the only person that will go on Teddy's scheme is someone who is mentally challenged. Like, he's not able to sell this to anyone. But I also think it's really tragic because he is manipulating someone who doesn't know better. He is hurting someone who deserves better, who deserves care, who needs care, and I don't think he's fully aware of it. Like, I don't think he's intentionally like, oh, I'm going to manipulate this guy, but he is. I forgot to mention also, and I might put this at the start, I will put this at the start too of my analysis, but I think what makes this movie more complicated is Donnie's inclusion, all right? Like, for example, Teddy is a character who initially will read as the working class hero going against the billionaire for some people, but very quickly it's not the case. Again, he chemically castrates Donnie. That's number one fucked up thing, even though he's really angry about what happened to his mum. Two, he actually is willing to murder, kill, torture, all of this stuff to multiple aliens. Let's even assume he thinks they're aliens. Like, that's animal interspecies cruelty, whatever you want to call it. But then when he finds out that Emma Stone, Michelle's character, is like of royal descent, she's high up, all of a sudden he's like, oh, well, you can sit at the table. Join us for dinner. Let me get you some clothes. Like, he's feeding in theory, also to, this sort of like the rich get richer and the poor need to suffer sort of mentality. Like, he's willing to treat working class aliens as terrible, but then he's willing to treat someone who he finds out is high up as like, wonderful and treat them better. And I found that some pretty interesting self-destructive commentary on this sort of character, I think Donnie is a really sad character who slipped through the cracks, but like, Jesse Plemons is not this perfect hero that I think people wanted him to be. He is someone that is using someone below him and not taking care of someone below him. And yes, this is part of a system that he's learned in order to survive, but it's tragic nonetheless. And I also do think, I think it's really interesting that Teddy cannot see the humanity in Michelle at all. And by the end of the movie, after spending so much time around that, she can't see humanity in anyone anymore. You know what I mean? He can't see it in her. And by the end of it, she can't see it in the planet. She's like, that's it. They need to go. Yeah, ultimately, I just thought this was a really fascinating movie. I think it was really well done. Thankfully, it's a remake that deserves to exist. I do think overall it genuinely improves upon Save the Green Planet. I think Save the Green Planet is a fantastic central idea, executed pretty well. And I think Begonia is a fantastic idea, executed wonderfully, so thank you so much for watching, everyone. Please like, comment, and subscribe if you enjoyed this video. Please consider getting a membership to this channel, as I mentioned before. Thank you so much, and have a lovely day.